Hello, we've been working on college essays and resumes, but now it's time to shift gears and look at some skills that will be very helpful on the AP exam, particularly with the prose fiction analysis, which is Unit 1, and it's going to be the second question that you'll write about in your free response questions. So we're going to be working on building skills for close reading. You have experience doing this with rhetorical analysis from your junior AP year, and this builds on that knowledge and applies it to imaginative literature. In this case, we can kind of have a really good combination of some true life events that have inspired fictional retellings with the things they carried. So let's move into this first step, which is going to be close reading skills and learning how to mark a passage and to write in some insightful notes in preparation for ultimately analyzing the passage in a prose analysis question. So the first part of any AP prompt is understanding that there's two tasks involved for the free response question. It's going to ask you to read a passage and analyze it for meaning, but also explain how the author achieves that meaning. So in this class, we'll often refer to those two parts of the question as big and little, like the Easter egg that you see in front of you. There's a larger end, and that has to do with meaning, but the author's method is also a really important step for that, and understanding how he or she arrives at that meaning. Big question and little question will, again, continue to be important throughout the year. So here's a prompt that is written for a sample passage from chapter 1 of Tim O'Brien's novel, The Things They Carried. And it has some context, and it also has both parts of the question, the big and the little question, a reference to meaning and a reference to method. The following passage is from chapter 1 of Tim O'Brien's novel, The Things They Carried, the semi-autobiographical novel about his experiences in the Vietnam War. That gives us some context, understanding that we've got a time period and we know who wrote it and that it's semi-autobiographical. This is your task. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how O'Brien uses literary elements and techniques, that's the little question, to do what? To characterize the soldiers and capture their situation. This is the meaning part, or the purpose of his writing this particular passage of description. So this just breaks down what we just said. Important background information, the big and the little question can be extracted from the prompt. And from there, then we're on a fact-finding mission to find examples that we can use to analyze and answer the question, how are the soldiers characterized? What is their situation? So what about it? And how do we know? And the how we know comes from the literary elements and techniques that we find. When we used to do this project on paper and when we were face-to-face, all of us, the notations at the end of a passage might look something like this. You'll see color-coded and arrows drawn on a handwritten passage. Because we are a distance, a lot of us, and or could be any day, are moving this to an online activity. And so the old paper version is going to translate to a digital version of the same thing, where we'll be using a simple table on a Google Doc with a special tool called the highlight tool to be able to, and I know you know how to use highlighters, but this special tool will help us extract some of those notations later, and we'll look at that as we go along. So let's launch into these 7 steps of notating a passage. Step 1 is just understanding specifically what is happening. It's the literal context. There's not a lot of deep thinking that happens here, but before you can analyze, you need to make sure you know who the passage is about, what's happening. You need a frame of reference for time, when, and a location where it's occurring, and why. The why here is not necessarily something that's a deep meaning it could be the who could be a family, what, it's dinner time, when, in the middle of August, where, at their favorite restaurant, and why, because it's someone's birthday. That just gives us the narrative context. So you need to make sure that you understand all the details from the beginning to the middle to the end of the passage, and very simply to record them in not even complete sentences. It can just be a list of notes. And here's an example from our chapter 1 passage that you can look through after you've read chapter 1 and see if your who, what, when, where, why matches the narrative context that is here. Step 2 will move us into some more specific author moves as we move forward. And this visual that you're seeing in front of you now just kind of breaks down where we're going to be moving along the steps, from the surface features to the thematic ideas that are associated in the passage, and finally to how the passage is organized. So as we move forward in step 2, we're looking at these features. And number 2 is our favorite word choice. I love to look for word choices in a document. And when I'm reading, those evocative word choices usually help me to arrive at meaning faster than anything else. So as you read through, you'll be highlighting with a pink highlighter just evocative word choices, something that stands out to you for some reason or other. And you can highlight as many of those words as you'd like. You might have as many as 20 in the entire passage that are highlighted or more. Remember, when you're highlighting for word choice, that it's a single word or maybe a pair of words, but you never want to see ribbons of pink in a document. You won't highlight an entire sentence. You'll just highlight independent word choices. Once you have finished highlighting through the passage, then you'll choose 5 of those words that you highlighted to write an analytical note in the margin. I would recommend that you choose some choices from the beginning, from the middle, and from the end of the passage. An analytical note does not paraphrase, does not define the word, it does not summarize what's happening in the passage. Rather, it explains what the word conveys or suggests, how it might contrast with other words in the passage, why that choice is fitting. Here's an example from the chapter 1 passage, and you can see I have about 5 or 6 words highlighted within the passage and have actually chosen a couple of them to write a marginal note. And the notes repeat the word and then begin with these helpful analytical verbs like suggest, or it's fitting because, to help me understand that I'm not writing just an informational note, but an analytical note is what is needed there. And also you'll notice that the marginal note is highlighted in the corresponding color of pink. And that is step 2. Step 1, who, what, when, where, why. Step 2, we're looking at word choices and writing about the deeper implications, the connotative meanings of those words. As we move forward to step 3, then we're going to look at the writer's syntax. Here is a little bit of a mundane task, but I'm going to ask you to underline, the first 4 words of every sentence. And while you're doing that, instead of just ignoring the words, you should pay close attention to patterns of sentence beginnings, to sentence lengths. If you have a series of very short sentences in a row, that might indicate some pacing. It might suggest a tone. Or if you have very lengthy sentences, then we want to explore why all of these ideas are connected together in a sentence. Also notice some punctuation choices like dashes or dialogue or questions that are embedded within the passage. Once you have completed your underlining of the first 4 words of every sentence, then you will notice some syntactical move. Only one is needed, but highlight in yellow. It could be a parallel structure or repetition, a rhetorical question. It could be some kind of balanced structure like antithesis. You can consult your yellow pages for some syntactical language to use, and you'll comment again marginally on one syntactical move. So you'll notice in my example for step 3 that rather than highlighting the whole sentence, I highlighted 3 conjunctions and in the middle of a very long list. And then my syntactical observation was about catalogs or lengthy lists. And then the note was to the effect of the lengthy list. Why did O'Brien include these long lists of objects? And what do they suggest? What are the implications of both the physical and the emotional language in the lengthy lists? So step 3 is syntax. We've gone from narrative context 1, word choice for 2, step 3, syntax, and now step 4 may be some of your favorite. This is where we're looking for those typical literary elements. Our best bets are metaphor, simile, personification, but you can also look in your yellow pages for a list or on the instruction page for some other examples, irony, imagery, etc. What literary techniques is the author employing here? You need to find 2 different strategies. So if you see 2 metaphors, then don't write about both of them in your marginal note, though you may want to highlight them both. Choose a different strategy as well. And the notation will be just like the word choice, where you'll begin your note with an analytical observation. Why is this a fitting comparison? What does this particular imagery suggest, or how does it connect the reader to some other experience that could possibly inform more in the passage? Why is this significant? Or how does it connect to something else in the passage? So for number 4, green, you would highlight maybe an entire sentence or part of a sentence to demonstrate the metaphor. The example here is a metaphor, and I've given a fancy AP term. You never need to know this for anything, maybe if you're on Jeopardy, but the term is zeugma, where it's still a metaphorical move, but it's basically saying that a verb has 2 objects. One of those objects is concrete, the other one is abstract. And so as they carried their gear, but they also carried the land and the sky. So that goes from the concrete to the abstract. And the words land and memory and gravity and sky within the passage are metaphorical. They're not meant to be literal. They can't possibly be literal. And so the note on the margin will suggest here that this physical weight of the physical burden is equaled by the mental and emotional toil of the other things that they carried, things that could possibly not really ever be carried by humans. And this is step 4. Now, as we move on to the next 3 steps, we're going to go a little bit wider in our observation of the passage. And so as we move to tone for step 5 and to step 6, which is ideas, and step 7, which is organization, we will discuss how to look more broadly at the passage in the next instructional video.